Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take the sources you've shared, sometimes a dense mountain of material, and carve out the essential mind-expanding insights.
And today's stack is really something else.
It is. It's this incredibly detailed legal critique, but it's all wrapped up in a philosophical argument about, well, the very nature of language itself.
The fascinating synthesis, yeah. So our mission here is to unpack the story of Chen Jingwan. He's a PhD specializing in physics and complex systems theory.
Right.
And he was arrested, tried, and ultimately sentenced to 1 year and 8 months in prison.
For what exactly?
For online speech acts. Between 2019 and 2022, he was forwarding and commenting on posts.
And we're talking about a whole range of things, right? It wasn't just one type of post.
Not at all. It was everything from political commentary to satirical art, and even statements that were made by foreign officials, all on a social media platform.
And this is the paradox we have to wrestle with today.
Yeah.
I mean, how does an act of what seems like academic inquiry, seeking and sharing diverse viewpoints, how does that turn into a conviction for picking quarrels and provoking trouble?
Or Sun Xinzi Shi, yeah. The sources we have, they don't just review the case. They go further. They argue this was a war on language.
A systemic failure of justice. That's the term they used.
Exactly. So our goal is to figure out the legal and philosophical machinery that took a handful of retweets and somehow manufactured a crime.
Okay, so let's start with the legal definition of the crime itself.
Yeah.
What did the prosecution actually have to prove, and how did Chen's defense team tackle that?
Well, to successfully prosecute this charge, the legal system needed to establish 3 critical components.
Okay.
First, there's the objective act. That means spreading sijingsinigi, or false information.
So lying.
Essentially, yes, spreading a rumor. Second is the subjective intent mingzi. This means the defendant had to know the information was false when they shared it.
So they had to have malicious intent.
Right. And then third, the consequence, and this is a big one, causing gungong ziksu yansong hunlon, or severe public disorder.
Okay, that third element, severe public disorder, seems like a huge hurdle to clear when you're just talking about one person sharing things online.
It is, and this is where Chen's background in complex systems theory comes into play, isn't it?
It is. He used science to argue that the crime was, physically impossible.
He did, and it's brilliant. The defense didn't just rely on, eyewitness testimony or something. They relied on information science.
So what did that look like?
Chen leveraged his deep understanding of complex systems concepts like network robustness, which is basically a study of a network's ability to stay stable even when parts of it fail.
Okay, hold on. Let's pause on the jargon for a second. For those of us who aren't complex systems theorists, what was he actually arguing?
Think of the social network, a platform with millions of users, as a massive, incredibly robust electrical grid.
Okay, I can picture that.
Chen was arguing that his account was just a single, tiny wire, an edge node, far away from all the critical infrastructure.
So his single comment, or forward, no matter how, provocative it might be,
was scientifically and mathematically incapable of generating a systemic avalanche. It couldn't cause a chain reaction, a grid-wide failure that would count as severe public disorder.
So he's using the structure of the system itself to say, hey, I lack the power to cause this harm. My action couldn't possibly create that consequence, so the cause and effect link is broken.
Precisely. The defense turned the prosecution's claim into a measurable scientific hypothesis.
And then reality provided the proof.
It did, in what the sources call a natural experiment.
A natural experiment? What do they mean by that?
Well, the observation made after Chen's arrest and conviction was that these supposedly dangerous posts, they just stayed online.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, unchanged, untransferred, undiscussed. There was zero measurable social harm.
So the sources conclude that this factually nullified the consequence requirement? The alleged harm was never real.
It was a projection, an anticipated fear from the authorities, not a real-world effect.
That demolishes the consequence element. So let's move to the objective act, spreading false information. This is crucial because if the posts weren't false, the whole case just collapses.
It does. And here they used a linguistic strategy. They categorized the content to show that it just didn't have the quality of being a fact that could be false.
So they broke it down.
They created 4 categories for his forewords. First, you have art and symbolic expression, things like satirical comics.
A metaphor, not a statement of fact.
Exactly. Second, subjective emotional expression, so, feelings or reactions. Third was rational or theoretical views and opinions, which are arguments, critiques,
On the fourth.
objective descriptions, or historical facts.
And the key distinction here is that you can't just declare a painting or someone's opinion to be false information. A rumor has to be a fact claim that you can actually verify or falsify.
Precisely. The defense argued that the first three categories are expressions. They're statements of position or feeling, not verifiable factual claims. And therefore, legally, they cannot be defined as yayan as rumors, which is the absolute prerequisite for the crime.
So that was a really sophisticated argument about the categorization of speech itself.
It was.
Okay, so we've seen the scientific and legal dismantling of the crime. Now let's get to where the sources get really abstract, the philosophy of language.
Right.
This section suggests the court didn't just make a legal mistake. They made a fundamental error about how language even works.
And this is where the analysis brings in the work of J.L. Austin and his Speech Act theory.
Right.
Austin argued that when we speak, we are always doing something. We're not just stating facts. Every statement has 3 layers of action bundled into it.
Okay, break those down for us.
First, you have the locutionary act. That's the physical act of speaking or writing, what was literally said. In Chen's case, he forwarded a text. Simple. Second, the illocutionary act. That's the intent or the purpose behind the words. Chen's intent was academic critique, archiving information, intellectual engagement.
And the third?
The perlocutionary act. That's the actual effect or consequence on the audience.
Which the court claimed was severe public disorder.
Exactly. So the philosophical critique here is that the court just completely disregarded Chen's intent, the illocutionary act.
They committed what the sources call a category mistake or a pragmatic fallacy.
Yes. They jumped from the simple locutionary act, a forward straight to this extreme perlocutionary effect, severe disorder, without ever establishing that the intent or even the capacity for that effect was there.
Wait, I have a challenge for that, though. Isn't the law sometimes designed to skip the messy intent part?
Go on.
I mean, if I yell fire in a crowded theater, that's the locutionary act, and chaos ensues, the perlocutionary act.
Well,
The law often holds me responsible for that chaos, right? Even if my illocutionary intent was just to conduct some bizarre sociological experiment. How's Chen's case different?
that's an excellent point, and it really highlights the philosophical nuance here. In the fire example, the perlocutionary effect, the panic is immediate, it's measurable, and it's directly tied to the very specific context of the locutionary act.
Correct.
In Chen's case, the defense established there was no actual perlocutionary effect, no chaos, no panic, no disorder. The court's error was prosecuting a feared or imagined effect while completely ignoring the verifiable illocutionary intent of academic critique, which is a protected form of expression.
That distinction changes everything. It means the court had to literally invent the effect to justify the prosecution.
And this leads us straight to Austin's concept of felicity conditions.
Right.
Austin argued that even these high-stakes verbal acts, like a judge declaring a verdict, "I find you guilty," they have to meet certain conditions to be legitimate.
You need proper procedure, sincere intent, the right context.
All of it. So if the judge doesn't genuinely believe the verdict is based on law and evidence, but maybe, on external political pressure, the whole judicial declaration is what?
Illegitimate.
The sources analyze the judicial verdict as an infelicitus act or an abuse. If the formal validity of the court's speech act is undermined because that sincerity condition is violated ruling based on non-legal factors, the verdict just stops being legitimate justice.
The sources called it a pseudo-performative.
Yes. It looks like a law, it sounds like a law, but it's hollow inside, because the underlying conditions for truth and sincerity were just absent.
That is a stunning claim, that the judicial system, in this instance, used its language powers deceptively.
Which connects directly to John Searle and the concept of social ontology.
What's fascinating here is Searle's idea that so much of our social reality, things like money, marriage, even guilt, are constructed entirely through language.
Specifically through what he calls institutional declaratives. The format is X counts as Y in context C.
X counts as Y and C.
Exactly. And the critique argues the court was using this power for semantic tyranny. Their declarative was basically forwarding specific posts, X, counts as a criminal act, Y, in the context of maintaining network order.
So they weren't describing a crime that already existed.
No. They were using the language of the law to manufacture a criminal social reality around Chen Jingguan.
Okay, so the defense showed, scientifically, the crime couldn't cause the result. Philosophically, they showed the court misused language to define reality, But the verdict still stood,
It did.
which leads us to the most unsettling part of the sources, the specific, blatant judicial errors that just make the verdict look like a predetermined outcome.
The sources are unsparing here. Let's go back to that subjective intent element, the Mingzi, or knowing it was false.
Right.
The verdict had a piece of logic so shocking, the sources call it the high academics as guilt paradox.
Wait, let me just wrap my head around this again. The fact that he was a highly educated PhD was used as proof of his criminal intent.
That is the absurd reality the sources uncovered. The court explicitly used Chen's high academic degree to presume subjective guilt.
What was her reasoning?
Essentially, because he is highly educated, he must have had enough intelligence and sophistication to know the information was false, and therefore he acted with criminal intent.
So his capacity for rational debate, the very thing that should have protected his speech as academic inquiry, was weaponized against him. It was the sole evidence of malice.
It's not just a legal mistake, it's an anti-intellectual presumption of guilt. You're punishing an identity, not an action.
And it violates that principle of prohibition against objective imputation of crime.
It fundamentally does. You can't assign guilt based on who someone is, only what they objectively did and why.
And beyond this logical failure, the sources cite profound evidentiary deficiencies.
Absolutely, like the prosecution just refusing to verify facts.
Right.
The critique recounts the prosecutor admitting he did not plan to verify the defense's evidence. And this was evidence suggesting some of the so-called false posts had actually appeared in state media before.
And the prosecutor's reason?
He said he simply felt the posts were false.
What?
It's a catastrophic failure of the evidentiary principle. The burden of proof is squarely on the prosecution.
And when Chen appealed, the appellate court only made it worse. They engaged in an illegal reversal of the burden of proof.
They did. The second instance ruling rejected his appeal, but criticized Chen for failing to submit new evidence to support his claim of innocence.
Which is just an absurd reversal.
You're forcing an imprisoned defendant who is presumed innocent to actively prove his lack of guilt. It's a foundational violation of modern criminal procedure.
We also can't really discuss this case without acknowledging the environment the trial took place in. It really underscores that whole lack of felicitous conditions you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. The sources note the trial was held non-publicly. That in itself raises red flags.
And then there were reports of rights violations.
Yes, Chen reported serious procedural abuses during his detention. Threats, forced confessions, being denied the ability to self-defend or even have his family attend the proceedings. This whole pattern suggests the system wasn't designed to find truth.
It was designed to secure a specific outcome.
Precisely.
So, if we synthesize all of this, the defense's scientific rigor, this profound philosophical critique of linguistic abuse, and these undeniable procedural failures, what does the case of Chen Jingwan ultimately tell us?
The sources present this case as a fundamental conflict between rational discourse on one side and arbitrary authority on the other. Chen used the tools of science, law, and philosophy to demand accountability.
And the system responded how?
The judicial system responded by co-opting this vague picking quarrels charge. They used linguistic tools to define reality and punish any expression that deviated from the accepted narrative. The legal mechanism itself was repurposed into a weapon to suppress thought.
So the ultimate takeaway for you, the learner, isn't just the details of this one legal defeat. It's the realization that the fight for justice is often, at its core, a fight for the right to define language.
Yes, it's the right to have your expression understood as critique or as art or as scholarship, rather than having it automatically redefined and criminalized by power.
This deep dive really forces us to confront the fact that when a legal system fails to respect the nuanced boundaries between the locutionary act, what was said, and the illocutionary act, why it was said, rational communication just dies.
And the law, in that moment, it ceases to be a tool for justice. It just becomes a grammar of power.
Which leaves us with a provocative thought to end on. If a society's authorities can unilaterally declare that a sophisticated academic's honest critique is, by definition, a criminal act of false rumor simply because of his intelligence, what happens to the foundations of truth? What happens to any complex society when the meaning of its words, and therefore its reality, is decided solely by authority, rather than shared understanding and verifiable facts? Something to think about until the next deep dive.